How's it going, y'all? Aiden Anderson here with Moscow Report. It's election season here in Moscow once again, and that means it's time for another round of Candidate Candids. In this series, we talk to candidates running in the local elections to learn more about them, their platform, and what they hope to do in office if elected. We're focusing on the city-level candidates this year, and in this video, we've got Moscow Mayor candidate Hailey Lewis. Let's get into it. Hailey, how are you doing today?
I'm living the dream. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Well, I want to ask, just because we are getting into the final few weeks before Election Day proper. Early voting starts next week, I believe?
The 20th, yep. Opens up October 20th, I think, yep.
All right. How has the campaign been going so far?
It's been great. Someone, when I was first running for city council, had cautioned me that campaigning is harder than the job itself, and I kind of laughed. But in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't, but it's been great so far. And I don't mind the fall weather finally being here.
Likewise.
But I've liked the lingering days of summer, which have made putting up yard signs and door knocking really fun. So.
No,
and
for
easier
sure
to recruit volunteers for.
Oh, absolutely. It's always better when they have an excuse to walk around in very nice, inviting weather versus sleet,
rain.
hail,
Yep.
etc.
Yep.
It might not stop the mail, but it does stop campaign volunteers sometimes.
Indeed, yep.
I must ask, so you mentioned elements of the job of campaigning being harder than the job itself. What are the surprising twists on that front?
I think partly it's that folks, especially when you're door knocking, if they don't know who you are or have never heard of you or don't pay a whole lot of attention to city governance or local politics in general, you're still looking at a pretty short window to give a really complicated answer in a very succinct way for someone who already maybe who isn't going to like the answer or the background context that comes with an answer for why saying the most common answer I give is it depends. And so I think partly it's just the nature of knowing you have a very short attention span for the person you're talking to. And just making sure that the really hard answers to hard questions are being communicated in a way that still doesn't lead someone to feel disillusioned with the system or just making sure that they feel heard. And so I think that's part of it. And also I remember the first time I door knocked 4 years ago. I mean, even though I felt like I know this town, I know the issues, I knew the issues in the town then, feeling just like you're putting yourself out there in a way that only politicians do, which is, it's some beginner's jitters, and it's nice not having those in the same way this time around.
For sure, yeah. And I imagine an element of it is you brought up people not necessarily being in the loop when it comes to local governance or city governance, and that's common enough as is, but then you actually having to interact on it. So you have 10 seconds to justify you being in front of someone's door, as well as here's something you should care about that maybe you didn't care about before. Also, I hope you care about me specifically for your vote this November. And so it's a lot. It's a lot for a lot of people.
And one of the hardest lessons to learn 4 years ago in campaigning was like, your goal when door knocking is to, in part, to just make sure people put a face to a name and you pique their interest. But I do remember there was one instance where I talked to a gentleman in town for about 20 minutes about water rights, and a much more seasoned volunteer who was out door knocking with me was like calling my phone. I was like, "Where'd you go? Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yes, like everything's fine." But we're trying to. The 20-minute conversations are encouraged and should be there, but it's also hard when you're going for making sure someone feels heard, knowing that if you say you're going to follow up on something, you will. But also knowing that there are issues and answers that will take more than 10 seconds to answer.
Absolutely. Hence conversations like this,
Yep.
hopefully.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it seems to me that you've at least got some of the campaigning thing down because you've been in office before. You are in office currently. Yeah. For the past 4 years, you've been on Moscow City Council. What has that experience been like? Any key takeaways, fond memories, or not so fond memories? We've been through a lot in the past few years as far as the city goes.
Yeah, it's been more work than I ever expected, but also more fun than I ever expected. And it's still the greatest honor I've had so far in serving my hometown in this elected capacity on city council. I think I'm thinking through like some of my favorite things. How about this? So I knew that I wouldn't know everything when I was running for office, and I don't ever expect to. And I usually worry when someone says with assertion that they have the answer to every question or that it's a black and white issue. I think I've come to more greatly appreciate the gray area. The other really large thing, like growing up in Moscow, I remember being in middle school and being sad about seeing like apartment buildings changing the landscape on the edges of town. And I love where we live. I love the rolling hills around us. And I remember feeling really sad seeing these apartments get built, or duplexes or condos or single family units, and feeling like we don't really need more housing. And as I grew to an age where I was employed full time and was looking for a place to make my own home, it was like, oh no, actually we do have a supply shortage. And so I remember feeling one of those first wake up calls was like, when there are proposals coming to the city to maybe increase inventory or do infill or annex new land into the city, I have come to really appreciate all of the, maybe not checks and balances, but the really thorough vetting that staff goes through to make sure that new builds are not going to have an adverse effect on existing infrastructure. If it will have an impact on infrastructure, that we're planning accordingly for water, for sewer, for stormwater, for roads and traffic, and just a whole new appreciation for what the existing processes are with the people who are close to the process, being the people in the engineering departments and those who do the modeling and work with contractors to make sure that every possible blind spot's being addressed. Literal blind spot too in some cases, as far
absolutely,
as
yeah.
tie-ins to roads and things like that. And so I've loved every minute of it. I've loved every hard and easy conversation, and I've loved every question from constituents. It's been really cool. Yeah, I'm really grateful.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. Obviously, transitioning out of that role for the time being, at the very least, going into January, there's going to be a slot of new faces going into council. Is there any words of wisdom, piece of advice you would give to the new faces who are going to be showing up in the next few months?
Yeah, I mean, because there will be no matter what, there'll be 3 new candidates. I'm sorry, not no matter what. We've got one of our incumbents, Gina, who's running. I think my biggest piece of advice is there are roles that the council plays. We liaise on the city commissions, and we're not there as a voting member of these city-run commissions, but there's also a slew of board positions that city council members occupy. And I think it's really, really important to understand board governance, which in some ways is different than council or commission governance, and understanding the difference between the expectations of serving as a commission liaison versus representing and acting as a voting board member on a nonprofit or multi-agency board. And it's important that we wield both of those tool sets differently, because they are different roles. And so just being ready to show up in each capacity as is expected.
Because from an outsider's perspective, they may seem very, very similar in terms of how they're structured, how they might be conducted, and some of the frustrations you might have with one, you would also share with the other, and yet they do operate differently, and the council doesn't operate this in the same role for each of these different boards. Like you said, they don't vote on the city commissions, they're just around, and as we've seen in council before, are sometimes very enthusiastic about them. Which is probably a good place to be, but ultimately that doesn't make you the decision maker there.
Exactly. And sometimes, I mean, there's been commissions that I've liaised with where an idea comes out or the commission expresses just feeling like, well, we could be doing more. And it has been fun in the case where commissions are excited to do more, to say, as the liaison sitting in that room, sitting with staff and helping liaise between staff and the commission, to say, that's great, here's the lane, and tell us what you want done, and you provide the recommendation to council, and council can discuss and decide with input from staff if we have the resources to do the thing. Whereas on boards like there are boards that I've served on where you are on the board as a nonprofit voting board member, and you are fiduciarily responsible. Like if something goes wrong, right, like it is not only are you there hoping to shape and represent hopefully a unified vision to city council of what council wants to see in that body, but also like if something goes sideways, like you are personally going to be held responsible for that. So bring that mentality to those board appointments.
Being able to weigh in because what you are doing is weighty, and being able to, hold your peace if what you're saying isn't going to carry any water to the same effect.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. So why this decision to run for mayor instead of running again for city council? It sounds like you love the job as you've experienced it. Why think about switching it up this time around?
Yeah, I mean, when Mayor Bedke announced at his State of the City address that he was not seeking re-election, I think the gears started turning, and it was like, okay, and that was the spring of 2025, and it felt similar to when I decided to run for council and jump in the deep end, which was like if we're sitting around looking at each other wondering, man, who's qualified, who would want to do the job, who's capable of doing the job and is qualified, like at one point with the council decision, it was like, well, I mean, I'm as qualified as anyone else. I do my best to stay informed on the issues and ask questions and approach things with, critical thinking and understanding that there is a lot of gray area in policy. And it was like, okay, well, if Mayor Bedke wants to retire, which he has earned after many, many years helping the city through planning and zoning and the Board of Adjustment on council and most recently as mayor, it was like, well, maybe it is time. And I love this city. I was one of the Moscow kids growing up who didn't. I think a lot of kids who grew up in Moscow take Moscow for granted. And the more I was seeing after I first started working after the University of Idaho, I had a lot of friends who would come back to town and be like, Moscow's pretty special. Like they'd come home and visit their parents and be like, wow, Moscow's got a good thing going. And I was like, actually, yeah, we totally do. And so I think just that fondness has only grown. And I do think that if Mayor Bedke was going to run for re-election, had decided to run for re-election, like absolutely the conversation would have been me seeking another term as a city council member. But yeah, I think if we're all sitting around looking at each other wondering who could do the job, I said, well, I'm capable, so and excited at the idea of doing it.
No, yeah, and it's good to hear that there's some good terms there with the present / soon to be previous administration of Mayor Bedke and the work that he's done. So good to see that the line of, I don't want to use the word succession, but it's the only one that's coming to mind right here, where, no, that makes sense. It's good that there's good vibes there as opposed to there being any sort of antagonism around, like, Mayor Bedke did things one way and I want to completely flip the table on this. So
yeah, no table flipping from me, no interest in that. So.
Okay, well, on that note, thinking about things related to platform and as you're considering the future vision you might have from the city, are there things in your vision for the city that maybe would differ from how Mayor Bedke is currently running things, or not even if not differ, something that you would re-emphasize and prioritize differently?
I don't know about differently so much as I think Art and Mayor Bedke, since he's still our mayor. And it is funny, a quick sidebar, there was one time that someone from a different jurisdiction had come to watch one of our city council meetings, and their comment to me after was, wow, you guys are really casual, like you refer to each other by your first name. And I was like, I haven't known it any other way. And in my mind, that signals to us, what I hope that signals, because what it means to me is that we are a team, and we do appreciate and use Robert's rules of order, but art's still art to me. Art's in my phone as Art Bedke. I don't know, as far as no significant departure from what he's been working on. He's been really focused on keeping the momentum behind the alternate water source conversation, which I'm grateful to him for. And he's been focused on supporting the Moscow Pullman Regional Airport and its efforts. And and those are important things and are within the purview of the mayor to advocate for. I think the things that I'm excited about, if elected, are maybe just showing a different set of tools that a different generation use. Like, I'm excited. We have very limited resources as a city to communicate what the swath of things and the ifs, ands, or buts that the city endures with questions from citizens. But I think one thing I'm excited about, knowing that we have limited resources, is exploring the conversation around like community neighborhood organizations, which has been in the comprehensive plan as a recommendation for over 10 years. And I don't necessarily think that's the role of staff to champion. I think council has been rightly focused on a number of other pressing issues. But it does seem like a conversation that the mayor could take on and help with some of the actual labor to understand what could it look like, where has it been successful in other cities, and see if we can find a model that citizens would be excited about, that would help generate some more neighborhood driven engagement, while also hopefully bringing people closer together and knowing their neighbors and fostering a better sense of community and understanding.
Mm-hmm. So this is, just so I'm hearing you correctly, this is separate from some of the conversations we've had on housing. This is more
Correct.
associated with community development, some of the communication piece, the transparency,
Yep.
that being able to have a good relationship across the, because there's a variety of, even though we are Moscow as one community, there are a variety of different communities that just exist within it that
Right.
occupy somewhat of their own space, have some of their own needs and priorities. I mean, the biggest example of this would probably just be the university,
Right.
and the ways in which the city interacts with them in their own somewhat separate capacity,
Right.
because there's a different pattern to life there, and a lot of the city participates in that. I know we just did the homecoming parade,
Yep.
and a bunch of people who don't go to the university were there, but
And it's still
It's
seen
still-
seen as a community event.
no,
right?
exactly,
And so-
exactly. But being able to foster that meaningfully, so that, because there's plenty of times when something goes out from council and there are a bunch of people who all of a sudden care a lot about this, who wonder, why wasn't I informed of this?
Right. And often there's going to be 2 or 3 other places prior to it coming to council.
Exactly,
Where the input
yeah.
would have been, it's not welcome by the time it gets to council, but how do we help address concerns or hear those concerns early in the process, where there's stop 1, 2, 3 before it gets to a council hearing.
If I may point to something, I'm trying to figure out if this is a recent example of this, because I know you weighed in somewhat heavily, or more so than you have on other issues before, and that was the East City Park stage.
yeah.
Okay.
I wondered if that, yeah.
I wanted to jinx you there, but
I
I'm
love
not going to
it.
make you.
I love it.
So unpack that a little bit, because
Yeah.
you've had some, shall we say, stronger opinions about the direction that issue has gone in your efforts to interact with the groups who are interested in this subject. So
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd be curious to tally the total number of like entire days that I've spent in East City Park for a variety of events. If you were to add up the sum total of, like, I was on the board for the Renaissance Fair, and I was on the board for Rendezvous in the Park for a long time. And when let's just put it this way. So the comprehensive plan had always included plans to replace and renovate the East City Park stage. When the city found out that it was deteriorating to a point, the actual physical structure of the old stage had deteriorated to a point of, like, it being a safety concern.
right.
This has happened before in other things that we slot in the comprehensive plan, and staff says, okay, what if we need to move this project up from 2030 because it is an urgent need, what else can get bumped down the list? And so it's not that it wasn't on our radar, it's that it meant that we had to adjust priorities.
Right.
And so when, I think it was 2009, there had been an engagement conversation. And I would also say that most of those community organizations who use the stage and the park year after year for these annual events, those boards do have turnover, not in a bad way, but in a very normal, I'd say healthy board governance matter and pattern. And so we dusted off the old plans, and I was open to the conversation. I think, along with a couple other council members, were really passionate about encouraging staff and the consultant, once we signed the agreement, to revisit the conversation with those entities, because the landscape of hosting public events from 2009 to 2000, I think we started the conversation in 2024, will have changed in 15 years. I guess I'm concerned that there's people who I think heard my comments as me completely changing my mind on if I supported the project or not, and that's not the case. If our job is to be, as city council and the legislative body, is to be good stewards of public funds, we've seen some other interesting creative solutions, like with the city of Pullman purchasing a hop-up stage that they use for the Lentil Festival and can rent out. And I think there were enough concerns that I was hearing from folks, in addition to my own concerns of, if we're going to pay over $500,000 for this project to go through and I'm not fully on board, can we also make sure that there are potential, creative approaches to addressing this need and making sure there's a stage that's functional for these community events, but maybe it isn't buying and proceeding with an entire construction project if we don't have the funds in place. If it's going to sacrifice, if the things that got moved down on the comprehensive plan list that are also are critical needs, what creative solutions could we pursue? I'm not saying don't bring a stage back at all. I'm saying, what could it look like if we wanted to do a rental stage at that location?
Right. And it's a little bit of a catch-22 I can see from an outsider rhetorical perspective, because while if you're voicing concerns about a particular project, that can look like you're voicing concerns about there being a stage out there at all, which is not what you're saying.
Correct.
You're just looking at this particular situation and saying, I'm not totally on board with this. But then to not be on board with this sort of puts the whole stage project in an interesting position.
Right.
So it's trying to figure out ways to combat that problem of, well, I don't want it to be all or nothing on this front, so can I provide an alternative that still allows me to hold to this position?
Momentum and,
yes.
And I think that's the other thing is, like, there are folks who assume a yes vote or interpret a yes or a no vote as only being 100% on board or 100% against something. And I think when you're on council, there are times where you may only be 80% of the way to a yes, but if the 20% where you have places of concern can be addressed or explored, then it's still going to be a yes vote. But that's the legislative process.
Right, and there's certain decisions where a yes vote is sort of mandated in some cases. Correct. Like we've seen with some of the input from state legislature relative to different laws and guidelines, and it's like, well, we can't really say no to the state here unless we really want to get into some really snaggly situations long term, and that's not what we're interested in doing. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that on the principle side of things, there's, I think the council tends to be pretty good of being like, okay, fine, but, and then expressing their concerns relative to, I would like to see XYZ addressed, or if there's some broader set of frustrations with things that we have to do relative to state mandates and that sort of thing. I think they've been pretty good of speaking their minds and making it clear. And of course, not all of that's going to come through all the time, but it's helpful to see that you're thinking about that when it comes to this issue. But bringing it back to the community side of things that we talked about before, just speaking with the stage thing, do you think that there is more work to be done then relative to the community engagement piece on that project? And where would you say work needs to be done there, if you think so?
Yeah, I am satisfied with the work that both city staff and the consultant that we're working with has done for community outreach. What I'd also say, and this kind of ties back to our earlier dialogue about door knocking, is how do I make sure that citizens know of all the avenues you have to provide input? And so there's conversations about tabling at farmers market. I think the best model of what has been successful in our town has been the rapid market economic study and assessment that the Farmers Market Commission works with the University of Idaho to do, I think every other year. And sure, your audience at the farmers market isn't only going to be voting constituents in Moscow. We know it's a draw for the surrounding communities and tourists, frankly. But I also think there's a lot that can be learned from people who maybe are only in Moscow once or twice a year, who give candid feedback for us to understand what the blind spots are, what the general appearance of what the question at hand is, and what their knee-jerk reaction to responding to it is like. And so I think we do a lot, but I'm thinking of the past few community meetings where we've had public vote to help determine what playground equipment will be provided. And it's, we'll have spec'd out 2 or 3 options, and we get maybe a turnout of 50 votes. And it's like, we are a town of 28,000 people and would love for us to find a way to at least, setting some reasonable goals and targets for getting a few more folks engaged in those kinds of conversations, but especially with the conversation progressing about the alternate water source that the city is pursuing through a grant with the Department of Environmental Quality, which is through the state of Idaho. Like, there will be a number of stakeholder engagement opportunities, and it's like, okay, how do we make sure that we are meeting people where they are at, which I know is not grammatically correct, but meeting people where they're at, and at least just getting a few more folks engaged in following the topic and giving us the chance to earn their attention and hopefully follow along in those discussions.
Yeah, if I can think of another example that is presently in that weird little nether space, I'm just thinking of the county and their jail situation.
Yep.
Now, obviously, that's a whole can of worms on its own.
Worms, yeah.
But I know from conversations there's a lot of conversation about, okay, there's a public engagement piece to this that is going to be really, really difficult to nail. Not just because people don't pay as much attention to what's going on at the county, but also because, hey, this is a decision that a lot of people just don't like on the face relative to whether we pass a bond or seek a local option tax. That's a whole level of infrastructure to get people, not just to pay attention to that, but get people on board so that something can be done about it. And so it strikes me that no matter what the level, what the conversation, there's always going to be a little bit of a hump of difficulty relative to the community engagement piece on subjects like that. Except for, and this is the whole like, oh, well, people love responding to surveys. That sort of thing, where, no, the people who love responding to surveys are the people responding, we love responding to surveys. That doesn't tell you broad-based what's going on everywhere else.
Which, quick sidebar and plug, for anyone, there's about, I'm going to get the number wrong, I think 300 citizens in Moscow at a random selection may have received a blue mail-in survey. Please, we have to have a certain level of participation for this survey to be valid. So if you received a blue envelope asking for your feedback, anonymous feedback, and data for the city to use in this conversation, please fill it out, because that is it would potentially unlock one of the additional resources that the city doesn't have at our disposal right now for accessing federal grant monies to address infrastructure needs that we don't have right now otherwise. So we just need a little higher participation. So, there's my plug.
Yeah. And what is the deadline on that for people who might be interested?
Yes. Gosh, I want to say the mail-in. Oh no, Aiden, I feel like it's the end of October, and I will have to fact check myself with Elisa, the grants manager, and we can put it right here on the screen.
The city has sent out several PSAs on this subject, so
they'll have phone follow-up calls for folks who have not responded yet. So I should know the date better, but I'm sorry I don't know it off top of mind.
No worries. If you still have a blue envelope, you should probably fill it out soon. Let's just get on it with that.
Yes.
Okay.
Love it.
Well, switching up gears a little bit. When it comes to, and we've touched on this a little bit with just the vote side of things, when it comes to discussion, and I know you and I have had conversations about this separately, relative to the nature of working with council members, disagreeing with council members, but then also if you're pursuing the office of mayor who interacts differently with council members. There's a bit of a authority switch up there that happens. First of all, like, what tools have you used before when it comes to the conversations you have had and working through these issues together when you're sitting there on council in meeting trying to figure out what to do?
Yeah.
And then do you see ways in which those are carrying over into the mayoral position, or new avenues that, hey, there's some things I'm going to be doing if I get elected that I'm going to have to do differently?
Right. I mean, I think at the heart of it is just like I've always felt really strongly that we are 6 people who come from different lived experiences and are likely friends and related to other people in town that the others aren't. And I feel very strongly that from the council perspective, from the legislative body perspective, like, our job is to have an honest and open dialogue in those settings and make the best decision we have with the information we have on hand at the time. I think the tools that we have, I mean, town's small. I like meeting with, I often run into our my other council members and the mayor and staff at a variety of community events, and I think that's just showing up and being present and listening is huge. As far as, I mean, what that would mean differently from a mayoral perspective, right? So the mayor serves in the executive branch role. And so the mayor just presides over meetings, and votes fairly rarely. I think the important piece is once the governing body has spoken, whatever the direction that decision is pointing staff or the community, it's whatever disagreement was maybe expressed in that dialogue and discussion before a vote is made, that we move forward with a unified voice backing whatever the decision is. Once the vote is done, I do my best to leave the vote in the city council chambers when I leave, because again, assuming everyone is approaching from a place of goodwill, which is very easy to do in a town like Moscow for me and the council members I've worked with, like, making sure that we're assuming good intent, assuming that we're making the best decision with the information we have available to us, and then moving forward in a shared vision and agreement that, like, the vote was made, this is the way we're headed. One thing that I have enjoyed visiting with the mayor of Pullman, Mayor Francis Benjamin, he meets monthly with city council members, and that is something that I think is some ways easier between mayor and council members. We are all the current roster of city council members are all very cognizant of, even if we're meeting up just to sit and, like, watch the Mariners game together or something, like, town is small enough that, like, we have to be aware that even if we're sitting around talking about sports or the next backpacking trip we'll take, that serial meetings are something of concern. I mean, it's important that we uphold only the highest standards in regards to making sure that when there's public conversation about a vote coming up or something like that, that we are having those conversations only in the arenas where those conversations should be taking place.
Right.
As far as, like, the mayor in Pullman, which I've enjoyed learning and watching him navigate, there's also an element of just, like, hey, the kind of ideas that are like spaghetti that you throw at the wall, and, like, let's see what ideas council members have that maybe haven't been yet filtered up, or they're just in their infancy. Like, what can the mayor do in those one-on-one meetings to help advocate or help a new council member navigate what doing the thing may look like.
No, absolutely. And there's going to be ample avenue for that going forward. Whether you get an elected position or whether there's just, hey, there's a bunch of people who are coming in to take over what you used to be doing, so what's going to happen?
Right.
And obviously there's a whole legal dimension to this as well relative to public meeting law and that sort of thing.
Yep.
But it's encouraging to see that those strategies are implemented, that there's a variety that do exist around us, that you have options to navigate in, and that the council is just generally more aware of this sort of thing as opposed to not being aware of it
Right.
and then what happens
Right.
following that. Switching gears again, and I was just thinking about this because you are, am I correct in saying you're a lifelong resident of Moscow?
With a really small asterisk, my mom's very first teaching job after she graduated from the University of Idaho was in Boise. So like from ages 4 through 7, I wasn't in Moscow. But as long as I can remember and I was in control of where I was living and what I've been doing, Moscow's home, yeah.
Okay. And I've heard it takes roughly 7 years to be considered a local here in Moscow.
I've not heard the 7, but sure.
The logic is the first 4 years you're coming to, it's a possibility you're coming to college here. And so that doesn't count because, of course, you're a student. You're just living where you're doing school.
Sure.
But then after that, you stick around 1 year, another, and then it's like, we gotcha.
Yeah.
But that aside, with you being more of a lifelong resident, what have been the biggest changes you've noticed in the town overall over the course of your life living here? Whether that's, maybe it's new businesses downtown or the size of the town or things relative to the community makeup.
Yeah.
What have you noticed?
I mean, I think there's always going to be an opportunity to improve what is called like the town and gown relationship, the relationship between a university and the city. My mind immediately goes to when I was at Lena Whitmore Elementary. It felt like, and maybe I just liked sports more then, but it felt like I was far more likely to drag my parents to like go to a University of Idaho event or and sports. And I don't think we've gotten away from that. I do wonder how much of it is just in terms of the intensity for like youth sports has changed. Like I was definitely just like a hobby volleyball player, and into my junior year of high school before I started working at the nursing home in town. And I do think just like the dynamics between getting people interested and excited about the community events around them is just harder. Again, people, attention spans are shorter. It's great that people have things they're passionate about, but I think in general, it's like, how do we help people who are looking for connection or looking for a way to get involved, do the thing? And social media helps in some ways, it hurts in other ways, but even just knowing what the opportunities are can feel really overwhelming.
And part of that, I imagine, is just as the town has gotten larger, there's just a lot more things that people coming here are interested in doing. And there are different things that arise to meet those needs, but then, depending on the caliber or the variety or opportunity, you start to become stretched thin in some capacity just because you as an individual can only do so much.
There's only 24 hours in a day, who knew? Yeah.
And so, but being able to build a pathway for people who, because there are a lot of people who are moving here for the first time, and, whether they're coming here kind of concerned and nervous or whether they're coming here like a female protagonist in a musical visiting the big city for the first time.
Right.
There's going to be all sorts of things that they are going to be faced with in terms of, there's so many options.
Right.
And connecting them to that which works well for them, while also having a relative unified sense of community around different things. Like, who knows how well attended the homecoming parade will be in future years.
Exactly.
Maybe they'll just be the university crowd because nobody else has the time for it, because there's the Lena Whitmore Pumpkin Festival that has sprung up over the last decade or so. I don't know. I'm just making...
Oh yeah, well, and I think the other thing that really sticks out in my head is like I've been really impressed with the role that our local Moscow Chamber of Commerce has solidified and expanded to just like also help be that facilitator between small businesses or medium-sized businesses in the community. And so I've really appreciated that, because I when I was in high school, I couldn't have told you what the Chamber of Commerce's significance was. And so it's been really cool seeing, I think also in terms of the general community sense of like how we're choosing to maybe not shop shop on Amazon for 24-hour delivery or, the Prime features, and understanding that like spending that money locally is a way to make sure that your friends and neighbors who work in those places like are supported in those ways. So that's been cool as far as like a generational shift as well. And I'm proud of that. I'm happy to be part of that, hopefully.
Yeah, I want to unpack that a little bit more, just because you touched on the generational shift side of things, and that's something where when I have been talking to just people in my circles, people on the street about this election in particular, they've noted distinct, there's been a conversation about the generational shift and the ways in which, I mean, obviously that's happening nationwide as just different generations come and go and different generations rise to prominence. How do you think more broadly those sorts of shifts are impacting Moscow right now? And are there things that the city, as a member of one of those younger generations yourself, are there things that the city can prepare itself for as regards those generational shifts, interests, priorities? Like an example in my mind is, okay, I've talked to plenty of people in the younger side of the spectrum who are concerned about like the housing situation because, and obviously there's been plenty of conversation at the city level about what do we do about the housing situation, but is there anything else you would add to that?
Yeah, I mean, and housing will I think continue to be something that we are asked about. The mayor and council will get asked a lot about. I know the city budget well enough to say that we do not have easily expendable resources to be seeking some of the solutions that like the city of Boise has, which notably is, I think, the largest city in Idaho. And the question that I get asked that I have to remind to ask myself is like, what is the right role? What is the right lane for the city to be involved in when it comes to things like housing? And I do think the solution is making sure that we are seeking feedback from the developers who are choosing to commit to building in Moscow, understanding if there are hurdles in terms of permit processing times or if there are requirements that the city is asking or inspection costs, things that we can be taking a closer look at, but also making sure that like it is a balancing act for us to make sure that we are recouping the cost for the city to administer whatever required inspections or reviews of plans to make sure that we're able to pay our staff what they're worth. Right. Which is more than we are able to right now. But as far as like a specific example, I think I've been passionate about the idea of like families being able to age in place since I was working as a dietary aide at what was then Good Samaritan in the kitchen. And one idea, Julia Parker and I had attended the Association of Idaho Cities conference 2 summers ago, that organization is really great. I've learned so much from serving on their board representing our district. But one really cool example that came about was what would it look like for the city to implement an additional incentive? It's not financial, but you'll see if you've watched the meetings, which I know you have, working through like the awarding points system for helping projects that maybe are a unique application or design that maybe is slightly outside the ideal zoning framework. What can we do? Because we know there's going to be exceptions. And one of the coolest, most simple options is, what would it look like for the city to incentivize developers to have no step entries and at least one wheelchair accessible bathroom on the first floor of every housing unit? And that is a very simple thing. I kind of forgot that I have a step to my front house and don't think anything of it, but all it takes is for one day where I've got a family or a friend family member or a friend who comes to town, and it is a new piece to their ability to exist and navigate Moscow or a home or visit. And so that's one that was a really great simple example that I think we could deploy pretty easily, and it doesn't penalize any developer who doesn't do it that way. But as one of the construction folks who was in this panel articulated, he said, the only change it meant for us was, as developers, we switched the order of 2 of the things that we do in building a house, and it really was no skin off of their back. It just was, they had never considered what the ease of, and I'm looking around at these houses, like what difference it could make to just for the, maybe it was foundation and framing. Nope, it wasn't foundation and framing, but specific to the front entrance, it's like, it's one minor thing that they had to change, and they just said we had never considered it, and now we do, and it's an easy thing for us to accommodate.
Yeah. And it's little things that make the big impacts long term much more favorable for people living with these conditions, for people who might yet have these conditions going into the future, just talking about aging in place, having families age in place, all that sort of thing.
Yeah. There's cool solutions that aren't always going to work with the tools we have available, but that was one where I was like, okay, let's see what we can, let's noodle on it and see where we can go from here.
Indeed. Well, I think I'm about wrapped up here, but I want to give you the opportunity to tell anyone where best they can find out more about you, about your campaign, volunteer opportunities, that sort of thing, as well as what you have coming up next.
Yeah, well, you can find me at HaileyLewis.com, Hailey like Hailey, Idaho, Lewis like LewisandClark.com. There's phone number and an email address there. My policy priorities are also outlined on the home page. Request a yard sign. Let me know if you want to volunteer. What's next? Today is the 13th. The 15th, we will be at the Moscow Chamber of Commerce's mayoral candidate forum. I think it's at 11:30. You have to buy a ticket to attend, but it's just to make sure they recoup the cost. For the record, Best Western has totally just like continued to blow me away with their really great catered lunches, which I love. And yeah, I mean, I think I am excited. I'm optimistic, and I think my focus in running is just making sure that Moscow continues to be a place that I'm proud of, proud to be from, that it is fun, and that we, I think it's important that we all understand that like the role of mayor is different than the role of council, and I think the experience on council someone coming from council to serve in the mayoral role can only improve everyone's experience, because we all know our lanes, but we also understand the collaborative nature of the legislative, judicial, and executive branches that come within city governance. So, yeah.
Hailey, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for hosting an invitation. I love it. Good stuff.
And that was my conversation with Hailey Lewis. As with all candidates, I highly encourage you to check them out yourself so that you can go into the election well prepared and educated. We'll have the relevant links posted in this video, and as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. I'm Aiden Anderson, and this has been Candidate Candids. We'll see you next time.